And we are live. Hello, everyone in internet land. It is How to Optimize for AI Mode using query fanouts and user context, brought to you by iPullRank and WordLift. We got people from all over the world. We are so excited. We are very much an international community, and I am so excited. Part of the reason that we were running late is so many people are interested in how to show up in AI mode or all these conversational searches. Is like we got sales calls, we got bills to pay. But I am joined today by none other than the co-founder and CEO of WordLift, Andrea Volpini. How you doing today, Andrea? What's going on, man?
Good. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited as much as you.
Dude, you are so in it. You're a builder, you're a tinkerer. You've got so much to add to this conversation. I can't wait to hear your presentation. We are also joined by none other than the Chief Relevance Engineer of iPullRank, Michael King. Hello, Mike. How you doing, sir?
I am fantastic and excited to be here, and also excited to see Andrea. He's one of my favorite people in our space doing some of the coolest stuff. So thanks for being with us.
Yes.
It was such a privilege, dude. I get to meet Andrea for the very first time at SEO week, which we are, if you haven't, been
I
paying
want to get
attention.
back there. Can we travel back in time and then we meet again and then Mike organize another event like that? And
I
every
mean,
day,
Andrea, you definitely got to be there next year on stage.
absolutely.
There you go.
It was amazing. It was amazing.
There
If you
you
don't
go.
have a ticket, get a ticket. If you don't have a ticket already, get a ticket.
So you heard it here first. We're doing it again next year. It was the end of April. It's been 2 months. Like, what? Time is a flat circle. It doesn't exist. But SEO week was incredible. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We have so much to get into. Just a little housekeeping. We will send the replay at the end of this to everybody. We are going to try our best to do Q&A. But if you have a question throughout either of the presentations, these guys love to go off the cuff. They love to answer as we're going. So I will very rudely interrupt them and let them know what your questions are, and they will answer them. And let's dive in. So, Mike, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in and I'm going to go straight to my section. How do we engineer relevance for AI mode? First, I want to say a quick plug for SEO week. If anyone wasn't there, I physically took the audience inside the algorithm. Like, we were looking at vector embeddings in real life, and we had some of the best speakers in our space. And we also had this gentleman by the name of Busta Rhymes that performed. So, get your ticket if you don't already have it. It's going to be crazy. We've already sold out on the super early bird tickets. But yeah, hope to see you there. And yeah, that's an actual real Times Square ad that we ran welcoming the attendees to SEO week. Cool. All right, so let's jump into how AI mode works. So the one-liner I've been saying is that search has gone from deterministic to probabilistic. And what I mean by that is, historically, the way that you put your content in was the same way that it came out on the other side. Google wasn't doing any sort of like interpretation of your content. Now what they're doing is they're looking beyond just like the primary documents that rank for the core keyword. And technically, to some degree, they were always doing that, which was why, topical clustering was always important. But they've expanded it dramatically, where they're running a series of what they're calling synthetic queries in the background. And then they're cobbling together a series of passages based on that. And then they're sending them through a series of reasoning steps. So the whole point here is that, it can be a very different response every time. Based on, what the language models decide to do downstream. So it's really important for us to also go back and think about how AI overviews also work as well, because I think we've learned a lot more information due to them being more forthcoming about the whole query fan out idea. And so I think that, when AI overviews first came out, we would say like, oh, you could rank, number 75 for a query and still be a part of the AI overview. But what was actually happening is that you may have ranked number 3 for one of those synthetic queries, and then you appeared as part of the AI overview. But, there's a variety of different approaches that they talk about in the patent for AI overviews, one of which is that they generate the response and then they go out and look for verification of that response and then give you that the synthetic response with the citations that go with it. And then the other version is like, okay, we go out and see what's related to that based on all those queries, and then construct the response from all those passages. So specifically for AI mode, what they're doing first is figuring out the contextual information about their user once they get that query. And then they're generating that initial LLM output. Then from there, they're going to go out and do the whole query fan out idea, get the synthetic queries, and then pull back documents based on those synthetic queries. From there, they're just isolating the passages that are most relevant, and then they're sending that through this classification of the query, figuring out like what is the intent and then what is the format of that response going to be. And then there's a series of different specialized LLMs that are triggered. So they may say like, hey, we just want to summarize, or we may want to pull a video in. There's a number of different things that they're going to do, right? Then they send all of that data through a series of these reasoning chains, and then they synthesize that final response. And then they apply that user context in the form of those user embeddings. And then they filter out what they're going to, ultimately show in that final response. And then they decide whether or not, or which citations they're going to use. Then they render the response for the user. So the query fan out technique, which Andrea is also going to speak at length about, is like the big thing that I think we need to be thinking about in our space. And so what they're doing is they're taking your core query, and then they're generating a series of queries that are, they have 9 different types, right? One of which is the recent queries that the user is using or user has put in because they want to have that context. Then they have things like the implicit queries. So like, what are they asking without actually asking in their explicit query? And there's all these other different types. And again, they are extrapolating here and then going out and looking for documents and passages that align with that. So we've built our first version of a tool to support this, which we call Qforia. Obviously, the QFO is query fan out. And the whole idea here is that we're giving you those synthetic queries or a version of those synthetic queries, and we're also giving you the reason why they're being selected. So we are actively taking this a step forward because what I've come to realize is that you can kind of, reverse engineer this by looking at the citations and looking at what those citations rank for. That's not to say that the rankings that you can get from the third-party tools are going to be an accurate list, but I think we should combine that with what we're seeing, what we're getting out of Gemini, and getting a more complete list in that way. So I anticipate that in the near future, we'll have a new version of this, but nevertheless, I think it's a great place to start with seeing how these systems might be thinking for generating these synthetic queries. So ultimately, there's a variety of different large language models that are used here, right? So there are ones used just for selecting things. There are ones for generating the response. There are ones that, are determining whether or not they need to generate creative media, or there are ones that may say like, hey, there's a next step query that we should suggest to the users. And so Google talked about this idea of there being personal context, them using information from across the Google ecosystem. What they've talked about most recently is them using like your Gmail to inform this. But ultimately, it may be other pages that you looked at, maybe products that you've purchased. But the whole thing that they're doing here is they're generating vector embeddings that represent what the user has done, how they've interacted across the Google environment. And they're using that as the filter for what is going to ultimately be used as a result. And then those passages go through a series of reasoning chains. So again, the whole idea here is that you want to have as many candidate passages that are selected here as possible. And it's not just about your site, it's also other sites. It can be passages that they pull from Reddit or from LinkedIn posts and things of that nature. So it makes our approach need to be more like omni media rather than just the own media environments. And the way I look at it is it's very similar to like how a raffle works. And you want to have as many raffle tickets as possible to be considered here. So as many candidate passages as possible. So the next thing I want to talk about is how the SEO community and industry is really not prepared for this moment. We keep having this argument about how it's all just SEO. And in the time that's happened, we've had third parties like Andreessen Horowitz come in and say, no, it's GEO. GEO is a very different thing. And I think we're really missing the opportunity to seize this moment to level up as a community and redefine what it is that we do. And a big part of that is just like the cognitive dissonance of what's happening right now with people being scared, right? Like you're sitting here and you're like, hey, my traffic is going down and I don't know what to do. And you're having to go to your boss and say like, hey, you know, traffic is going down. I don't know if the best practices that I know how to do are going to make a difference. And so you're just being like, well, it's still using a lot of the same mechanics as SEO. So it's just SEO. And I think that's just the wrong way to think about this. And a lot of people point to the fact that like for AIOs specifically, there's like an 85% overlap in the Google SERP versus, you know, what you see in AIOs. But that's not always going to be true, right? And I've been saying this for a while. And this is a screenshot from an AMA with the CEO of Perplexity. And he was saying like, hey, once reasoning comes into play, once deep research comes into play, like, I don't know how much SEO is going to, you know, impact things. And really, I've been saying this since before IO, but once they started talking about how Google's having memory and using personal context, all this stuff is really coming to life right now. And what we're talking about here is really a platform shift, right? Like once you start using things like the model context protocol or what Google announced, the agent-to-agent protocol, you're going to be talking about things that are far beyond the content that's being indexed. You're going to be talking about third-party data sources that you have no visibility into. And so it's dramatically going to change how the platform operates. And so then when you start talking about things like memory and this hyper-personalization, things like rank tracking are going to have to change dramatically as well. So we are not prepared for this moment because we don't have the tooling, and we keep pushing back on the idea that, you know, things have fundamentally changed as to what you need to do here. So how do we actually engineer relevance for AI mode? The way I'm looking at it is you need these matrix approaches to relevance engineering. And so what I mean by that is you've got to, you know, figure out like, how do you rank for first the primary queries that the user's typing in, and also those synthetic queries as well. And then you've got to generate vector embeddings for each of those passages, and then figure out, okay, which of those passages do you own, and how do you make your content perform better in these pipelines than your competitors. And so really what it ultimately comes down to is that you've got to optimize across a variety of pages for a variety of passages so that you have more opportunities to make it through those reasoning chains. And the problem is there's really not that many tools out there that really support it, right? Like I know that the WordLift team is building some great stuff, and Andrea is going to talk about it. But beyond that, you're going to have to pretty much build your own stuff, right? Like your own semantic chunking tools and relevance calculation tools. And, you know, there's tools like AirOps out there and Human First, which allow you to build these like customized data pipelines and action pipelines where you can pull in this data and build these vectors and calculate these sorts of things. But there's no like content editor tool out there that's going to really support what you need to do right now. And so as far as like pulling data from AI mode, I know the DemandSphere tool, our team has new functionality for this as well. But also if you're building your own tools, I recommend a platform called FetchSerp, which will give you the AI mode responses via an API as well. But ultimately what's happening here is that your documents are being decomposed in two ways by Google, right? Like there's the historic way that we call lexical, where it's just like the tokenization, where you're counting the distribution rates of words and so on. But they're also decomposing them on a vector embeddings level as well. And they're indexing these vectors. And it's really challenging for me to see that, you know, we don't have like a vector database of the web. Like I don't understand why the link indices aren't like moving in this direction, because it's something that we certainly need. And I see a question here is we need to learn how to code now. I mean, everyone can code now, right? Like there's vibe coding. You can literally just talk to a language model and tell it to build you a tool. So I don't see that as a barrier to entry for anyone at this point. And then it comes down to different chunking strategies. So there's a variety of ways that you can build these semantic chunks. Google doesn't do it based on like the number of characters. They're doing it based on where the semantic boundaries are in content. And so effectively, you need to be thinking about your content in that way as well, like breaking it up into paragraphs that speak to very specific answers to questions and so on. And then you also want to be using semantic triples. You technically should have been doing this the whole time, but it's this whole idea of, subject, predicate, objects in your sentences. And when people think of some structured data, they typically are only thinking about like schema.org, but semantic triples are how these systems, these natural language processing systems, are extracting information in that same sort of way. So what I was saying before about like the semantic chunking, you want to break your content into these clear semantic units. So clear headings, clear paragraph that speaks directly to that idea and answers that question. You also want to be using data in your sentences. You don't want to be making, vague statements like electric vehicles are popular. You want to say things like electric vehicle sales reached 1.2 million units in 2024, because these language models are extracting these data points in that way and then using them directly in their sentences. And then the other thing you want to do is improve readability. And good readability is valuable in a variety of ways. Like we've always found that if we've compared a metric like page value, which I don't think you can get out of GA anymore, but historically we would use that, which gave you like a dollar figure associated with a page based on conversion paths. And we compared that with readability. We always found things that had easier readability had higher page values. So there's value in doing this, not just for these language models, but just generally thinking about improving your readability is a good idea. And then generally just being more specific and unique in your content is going to empower you to appear in these sentences. And then also embracing topical clustering, because again, when we think about this whole query fan out idea, if you have content across that topic cluster entirely, you're going to have more opportunities to be a candidate passage. And also spreading your content message across your site and beyond your site. So, on other sites like LinkedIn, your press releases, your digital PR, your guest posts, having that message that aligns with these passages that you want to be creating is going to give you more opportunity to make it through those reasoning chains. And then finally, you definitely want to have more content across different formats, because they're considering things that are being said in videos and images and so on, in audio as well, and also in different languages. They're not just looking at English to generate these responses. If the best answer for this is in Japanese, they're going to then translate that and then feed that to the language model as well. And if all this is too complex for you to get done yourself, well, you can holler at us. And that's all I got. I'm going to hand it off to Andrea.
Holy crap, Andrea, you got to take over. That was
fast.
That was
tremendously fast, but it's been also very clear. And I'm gonna now make everything very confusing. So that's my specialty. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the concept you will hear it again, and of course we are into these agentic web. So the big shift that Mike was talking about is really that there's no longer a users in front of you, and maybe there's no longer the need for static pages. I'm not going to repeat this because it's kind of scary, but maybe there's no longer need for static pages, because we're moving from generative AI to agentic AI. And I want to make a step backward because I'm an old guy. And so I want to travel back in time to 2001 when the semantic web idea was introduced. Because we talk a lot about AI, and it's scary, right? The way in which we typically talk, the industry talks about AI, it's about replacing jobs and creating this giant agentic economy that doesn't need any human. So I want to share the message that symbolic AI, so when you start using semantic data, it's a little bit more reassuring, because since the very beginning, there is always a human expert that it's within the loop and curates the data in order to make it accurate and meaningful for the machines. Already 25 years ago, the founders of the World Wide Web created this notion of building a web of data for AI agents. So it's nothing new. It's been like 25 years that We've been preparing data for AI agents to come, but that doesn't mean that humans are gone. And the same applies to SEO. So I totally agree with Mike. It's a completely different game, and it's an amazing opportunity, and it's fun, but it doesn't need to be scary. So in this very significant paper that was introduced in 21, AI was all about basically two things. One, it's knowledge representation. So in order to create machine, we need to represent the things that we know in a machine readable format. And then it's all about AI agents. These AI agents are reading and getting the data and are consuming the data in order to provide humans with an answer. So very practically, you have your existing content, whether it's a blog post, it's a product page, it's a video, and you want to build this semantic layer. You don't want to look at structured data as just something that you do for Google, because Google eventually will not even care much about your structured data, but you are going to need this semantic layer in order to control the AI experience and make sure that you build relevancy. So AI understanding comes from, for example, co-occurrences. If I mention my name with Mike's name all together, you realize that WordLift and I will rank and work together, and we can make your site great again. So the AI works in the similar way. It just connects the entities and realize that we can kind of combine entities together and kind of drive results. In order to get control of these co-occurrences and entities and contextual understanding that AI needs, you want to build this semantic layer. You want to kind of write all your metadata in one place, and you shouldn't feel limited to schema.org. You can, if you're doing e-commerce, you can start expanding your schema and add a GS1, and then some of your data will be consumed by agents that you will build for creating content updates or for creating engagement on your customer base. So remember that when you build something, you're not building for someone else, you're also building for your internal AI processes. And so marketing has changed in a way that there's no a single ranking factor. Yesterday someone asked me, okay, what is the most important ranking factor in 2026? And I say, well, I don't think there are ranking factors, to be honest. I mean, it is really about creating a reinforcing cycle and consistency around the information that we share with AI. And it's not really about, I can change this, and so I can rank on, position number X, because there's no position. It is fluid. If we look at AI responses, these are hyper-personalized, stochastic by definition, and so there's not going to be an average position. So you can, yes, tap into the index and you can outrank your competitors into the web index, but that doesn't mean that you will be shown in an AI response. So at the core of the system, you want to build memory. You are building memory for, Gemini to learn about your products. You're building memory for your own AI in order to automate SEO and marketing tasks. So you want to think in terms of, very strategically in terms of memory. How do you structure and organize memory? How do you make your agent converge on your platforms? Because you might have a CMS on one side, and then maybe you have an e-commerce on another side. Maybe you have reviews on another side, and you want to kind of look at all these silos and kind of cross them together and build what I call the ontological core. You want to bring them together. Why? Because AI needs consistency. And so I introduced, and Mike is helping me here, this concept of SEO ontology, which is basically a way of standardizing crawling data and standardizing SEO metrics and performance metrics. Why I want to standardize this is because I want agents to be interoperable. And so if I build my agent, I want my agents to be able to, look at the performance metric of my clients. And if my clients is using OnCrawl or is using DemandSphere or Bodify, I just want to see the data in one interoperable format, because then I can, optimize at the speed of AI. And so we have this initiative, it's open source. We're kind of gathering different perspective around how we model data, because the way in which we model data, it also changes the way in which our agent work. Okay, so what do we do? So I've been investing a lot on Model Context Protocol for our own tool, but also because I see these as an important way of transforming your existing static content into a dynamic AI experience. So if you have a website, currently you can build a knowledge graph with WordLift, and automatically you have a Model Context Protocol that exposes everything, to any other AI. But so for those of you that are not familiar, Model Context Protocol is a client-server architecture. And so you have basically, I always say it's like HTTP for AI agents. So it's a way of, putting AI in communication with your data. And you can bring into an MCP server the tools that you want, the favorite prompts that you can use on your platform, and resources. For example, because our AI agent has to build reporting, I always have as resources the WordLift branding guidelines. So that's an example of a resource. You can put your own guidelines as a resource so that the AI can learn how you want things to be formatted and presented. So very simple example here. I'm running a prompt and I'm speaking with our MCP, and I'm asking to go on and create multiple agents, because we can have one agent, but with MCP we can start creating multiple agents. And so here I'm instructing a lead agent to go on and try to find click-through rate drops that might have been caused by the appearance of AI overview. So here I have one agent that goes and check the SERP and try to see if on the main query there is already AI overview, and then another agent that is looking at the Google Search Console and is looking at the drops. And I can extract this system, and because every agent is MCP interoperable, I can have like 5, 10 different agents that are working together in order for me to get a final report. So very simple. I can I will dive deeper in a separate session, but I can build reports now at the speed of light, because I have this army of agents that are using the knowledge graph. So are using the human crafted data from your website, enriched with SEO properties and marketing data. So I can speak the same language, and I can say, okay, now go and look for any drops. Let me know if it's dropping because the content is crap or because there is an AI overview in place. Because, well, that's also the reality, is that now we are kind of obsessed about AI. And so I realized that, we always think that, we're losing clicks because there is AI in the middle, but reality is that maybe we haven't updated that piece of content for years. so be aware of that. But yeah, key message. Your next client is an AI agent, and so we want to build conversational interfaces, and we want to look at passages. We want to look at these chunks. We want to look at these snippet of text that can be used by AI to be trained on providing a response. We are effectively in a post-human internet, so humans are relying on agents, and so we want to prepare data to be AI friendly. We want to build this self-reinforcing cycle, so that if you are declaring a piece of information on one side, you want to make sure that it's consistent on another side. You can do this with data. So if I'm saying that WordLift and iPullRank work together, then if I say it on one side, I want to say it on another side, because this AI will counter check and then they will validate that piece of information. And you want to be memorable. What does that mean? That marketing, in a way, it's becoming about a way of influencing memory of these systems, because memory is what sticks inside the language model when he has to describe, I don't know, the best SEO in the world, or what is the best tooling for doing that, or what is of course, best SEO, but so let me quickly do a digression on language model, because it might help us understand the last part of the query find out. So what has really changed? The use case you show seem very similar to what I've seen on AirOps. The difference, the MCP. Well, there are differences. The difference in AirOps, you have a kind of a static decision tree workflow. So you kind of join things, then you have conditions. No, what I show you, it's an AI agent that it's instructing multiple sub agents, and it's taking some decisions. So it's planning. So there is a lead agent that makes the plan, and then there are sub agents that are executing part of this plan. You can use, of course, Agent World inside AirOps, inside NA10, depending on the level of agency that you want to leave to AI and that you want to keep for yourself. So what are the two things that have changed over the course of the last years? And that brought me back to 2017 when I built my first LSTM language model. And it was for my friend Mian Mian. She's an amazing writer, best Chinese writer for a long time. Great book. So she's been censored over the course of the years, as you can imagine. And so we took everything that was censored and we built a language model with that. So everything that has never been public became, this language model in 2017, and then we made an exhibition in a museum in China, and so on and so forth. But what has changed since 2017 when I built my first 5 million parameters model? Well, the number of parameters has dramatically increased. Now we have this mixture of expert models that have trillions of parameters, and parameters are an indication of the level of complexity of the systems. And the other things that has greatly changed from my first experiment that had a memory of 100 token is the context length. And of course, the more the context length increases, the more complexity arises, and we can do great things with language models because they have better way to attend to a vast amount of information. And that allows us to introduce different dynamics for making the system think more carefully about what type of answer. And so things like chain of thoughts have been introduced, and then we came up to great reasoning focused language models. What are reasoning focused language model? They decompose a task and create multiple steps. And why they are important in SEO? Well, guess what? When you for example, use AI mode, well, there is some reasoning process behind the training of the model that will find out the queries, and it's completely different from the reasoning that another model will do in a similar situation. A lot of search is no longer instant. A lot of search is running for minutes. Deep Search, Claude, Anthropic recently unveiled some of their strategy for building research agents. And it's a completely different game because you have these reasoning models. And so we want to understand more about how these reasoning models are trained and why they're important in SEO. And if a few years ago I would suggest you to become a prompt master, well, now I suggest you to become a policy master because you want to train your own model to do SEO for you, and you want to do with reasoning. So this is a collab with the slide. You get a link and you can start playing with how reasoning affects search. So you can see, for example, how a model like GPT-4 or without reasoning would give you some results, whether a model like DeepSeek V3 with reasoning will give you completely different results. And that kind of brings you back to what Mike was saying. It's very hard to predict what's going on, and so you have to think in terms of probability. You cannot think in terms of ranking or ranking factors even. There are different ways in which we can build a system that think, and so there are 4 paths. I'm not going to go dive too deep here, but that's a good question. So whether they like it or not, it's going to happen because even a large corporation is going to be in the hands, in the mechanical hands of an AI agent, and that is happening. So my suggestion for the large corporation is really to present as much data as possible, build this semantic layer because that's the only way in which they can control what any AI system would do. Again, when you think about reinforcement learning, if I am making my data available, then these large AI company or even small guys like us can build their reasoning model on the available training data. But if you don't make data available in a semantic format, it's very hard to influence these reasoning chains. So query fan out, this is my way of looking at things, very similar to what Mike has shared. I want to just show you a very quick example. I took a website, a legal website, amazing, great client of ours, and he wrote an article, And the way in which the workflow that I build and I share it open source, so other people are already building and testing different things on it, which is why I share it open source. The way it works is that you give it a URL, and then it will simulate the way in which AI mode will find out the subqueries. And I've done several iterations. I started to read at Mike's article and the patterns that Mike was looking at, and then I try to reverse engineer the way in which these queries are done. And then, after it creates the subqueries, it will chunk the content from which you have started. One interesting aspect is that the way in which I'm creating the subqueries is by letting Gemini understand what's the most interesting chunk in this page. And Gemini is a beautiful mechanism for, kind of highlighting the main chunk of a page in relation to a query. And so I use this mechanism to extract the entity, and then from an entity, I create the subqueries. Interesting example is here. So here I've found out several queries, and I take the first one where there is a high degree of similarity. So apparently the client is doing a good job in responding to these synthetic queries that I created with that I generated with the fan-out simulator. And guess what? If you go on that specific query on AI mode, they're ranking first. And so it's becoming quite simple now to reverse engineering, because also, as we were saying before, you can get this data, so you can retrain your model that does the fan out, and then you can start to see that there is a correspondence, at least at the probabilistic level, that if you have good content on the page for responding to that specific query, then most probably you're going to appear as a citation in the AI mode response. So how do we optimize content? Mike explained already, but I'm going to just repeat some of the concept. You want to build very clear and schemable chunks, 150, 300 words, up to 400 tokens. You want to use descriptive headings, short paragraph. Google is using semantic chunking, but it's also using these layout-aware chunking techniques. So, headings, bullets, anything that can be kind of grasped as a response can be used. Of course, tables, data-rich information, very much liked by an AI system. You want to focus on a single entity. So it's not that you just want to write these chunks, and that's kind of an important aspect. You want to add the attributes. Let's say that you have a question about a product and what is the material the product is built in. You want to have that in the page. You want to have that in the structured data. You want to have that sent over to the Google merchant. And so you want to kind of propagate the attribute of the entity. And also you want to connect the entity with other related entity. For example, if someone is looking at a bracelet, maybe some of the question would be about the collection of these bracelets. And then you want to connect one entity with the collection of the bracelets, which is another entity. And so you can actually optimize your content not only by writing in chunks, but also by building data and putting data in relationship, because that allows an LLM to understand more about how you're thinking and how this is matching the user query. And of course, you can do this also with internal links, because you might not have the proper chunk on that page because you have already on another page. But if you link it, then at inference time, an LLM can read it. And then maybe you can even use a text fragment so that the text is explicit in the page. And so there are, these are kind of, techniques. But what is making all of these more complicated is that, Google has an identity graph, okay? So it knows a lot of information about us. And there is kind of an unseen end in this process. So whether, yes, we can reverse engineer the mechanism of query fan out, we need to start thinking in terms of who are we speaking with? Because, if I am asking about a new car, if Google knows that I'm into EV, then most probably the fan out will be influenced by the fact that Google knows that I'm into EV. And so the way in which the fan out will work, it will also depend on the context tune. And here it's pure speculation. And the reason I'm doing this is because I know Mike understands me, maybe a few others will. But so here I'm guessing that if I am Google and I want to bring context, user context into something, at web scale, like AI mode, I need to do something like adapters. And of course, Google has been working on hyper-personalization for years. This is an old patent, 2008. And it just tells us the same story that we're telling you today. So Google is looking at, your interest, the context of your previous session, maybe even, the PDP, the product description pages that you visited before, and specialized journeys. So cluster of searches that you've done. And this is coming into, the generation of the subqueries, because it's going to be personalized. But how does it work at web scale? How can we personalize at web scale? So because it's so complicated to personalize, a language model for each and every one of us, I'm thinking that Google might be using these adapters. These are kind of very small models that are kind of trained on cluster of people. So if people are thinking or doing similar way, then Google can build immediately, very quickly, an adapter with very few parameters. And this adapter can be plugged into an LLM like Gemini or Gemma, and then it can gives you the personalized context. The beauty, if Google is really doing this, is that it could actually do it on the client. It could do it on your Android. It could do it on Chrome without even, breaking your privacy. So it would work also for Europeans that are kind of, as you might know, obsessed with privacy. So everything that, can be fan out and made personalized can be done with an adapter on your Chrome browser, on your Android device, on your iOS device. And I think that's kind of the direction where they're going, or if they're not there already, they might go there. So in order for us to simulate these, we can really build the personas about our users and try to understand, am I speaking with someone that is looking into electrical vehicles, or I'm looking at someone that is looking at speed, for example. So these adapters are very small trainable neural network models that you can plug into a language model, and they could bring personalization at web scale, and keep it also potentially private. So just to conclude, because we want to keep some time for questions, I want you to go home and think in terms of a new agentic web, and start thinking in terms of automating a lot of your work, because it's possible. Start thinking in terms of curating your data, so building a data fabric, and think in terms of knowledge graph and structured data, and expand your knowledge of vocabularies. Don't think of schema as something that triggers a rich result, because it does, but that's not the real game there. And you want to start thinking in terms of reasoning model, because this is how AI is thinking today. And also, this is how you want to train your AI in order to write the next piece of content, in order to evaluate the readability. We have packed Agent WordLift with a lot of tooling. For example, Readability, it's one of the tools that Agent WordLift has. So you can go and say, evaluate the content, and it will tell you what readability is shit. And usually my readability is very bad. And so you can tell it, okay, now help me rewrite it. And then I want you to start thinking in terms of hyper-personalization. And that really means that you want to focus on the customer personas. You want to focus at intents, and I want to see all of these into your graph, because then we can use these for creating, these very high-level personalized chunk. Remember, when an AI is looking at a response, you want to give a response either in a form of text, in the form of data, or in the form of both. And you can create links. You can create, information architecture that speaks for themselves. And really, success is going to come out of self-reinforcing and memories. It's not going to come out of, the techniques that you've been playing with until now. That's all. Boom. Confusing?
That was fast. Yeah. I didn't know about the way you explain the adapters. It's so fascinating, and almost like an affinity group kind of model. I realize that. But I mean, it
could be.
Could be a lot of great questions. Before we dive into the actual ones, there's a whole chat going on. Tira was talking all about this idea of long form content versus short form content versus internal linking. Obviously, it depends, but do either of you guys have an instinct in terms of content strategy wise? Does it matter the length of your content trying to address query fan out?
Yeah, it doesn't need to be a bunch of short pieces of content. That's kind of the whole idea of passage indexing, where they can understand like this one section in this long document is what I need, and I don't need just a short version of the content. And so there's opportunities where like the same page could be ranking for different synthetic queries. However, there is like a need for diversity. So in a lot of cases, they won't use the same page over and over in those synthetic queries. But nevertheless, you shouldn't just make it long or short for this environment. And in fact, from that leaked data that Mark Williams Cook got last year, he built that classifier where you could say like, okay, this query needs to be a short fact, or this query is like a Boolean or whatever. And so I would use that sort of data to inform like the length of the content that you're going after for a given query, rather than thinking like, oh, well, AI mode only uses short content, because it doesn't.
Andrea?
I'm running an experiment live. If you share my screen, I took a very long piece that Mike wrote, and so just as a demonstration. So this piece that Mike wrote about how AI mode works, it's a perfect example because it's a very long piece. However, it is fully optimized for chunks. So when I tested with my fan out, as you can see, other than kind of these three queries over here, everything is addressed. And so again, your content needs to be focused on the human reader first. And so you want to kind of tell whatever story you want to tell, and it has to be optimized in terms of user experience as well. But it doesn't need to be made of short snippets of text, right? That's a clear example of how you want to write a piece of content. Of course, internal links are very helpful, and there is another aspect. Like if we're looking at transactional queries and we are in the realm of e-commerce, then really the data plays an important role, because a lot of the questions are going to be answered by structured data. Like, for example, what are the return policies, and how long it's going to take for me to get the product at home in Italy, or information like this can be embedded into the data behind the page. So it doesn't need to be just passages. It can be triples, as we say before.
That's such a good point. I mean, you think about in terms of like as search behavior changes and the queries get longer, they all become more conversational. They ask all the specifics, all that content. You're talking about the structured data, especially in e-commerce, is critical. Let's dive into some PPC. Stan's got a question. What do you think is going to happen, guys?
That's for Mike, huh? That's complicated.
Well, yeah, I mean, they've already announced what the ads are going to look like for both AI overviews and AI mode. And it seems to be a bit fascinating in that they're leveraging more of the generative AI on the targeting side for how you're going to show up in the ads. So it's not like explicitly you set the keywords. It's more that you just align it with your landing page and it figures it out, and then it serves it pretty much dynamically. And also it can I'm not sure if this is exactly for the AI mode ads or not, but there are things in that side, the advertising side, where they can take your content and then generate assets based on it too. So I think this is going to play out, like generative AI in general is going to play a lot with this space, but they do specifically have ad units for AI mode and AI overviews.
I think here the only thing that I can add is that Google has been investing a lot on performance max, right? So what they want is to optimize results for you. And what we've seen successfully now in several cases is that we can reduce the cost per click with PMax, as long as we create a lot of, we provide a lot of data in the form of structured data behind the web page. And so I do expect that as we progress, there's going to be a lot of hyper personalization. And so you're going to be very much detached from, kind of setting the intent, and you're going to let Google run the show as long as, you provide enough data. This is also important because, like, when you do the fan out, do you need to cover all the questions that synthetically you can generate? Not really, because, I mean, if these are not consistent with your brand value, for example, you shouldn't. I mean, again, you want to kind of express something that it makes sense. You're not just over optimizing and say, okay, I want to answer every question. I want to answer the question of my clients, and there are maybe like 3 questions that really characterize my unique selling points and my clients, and that's where you want to look at.
Here you go. Noah wants to know, what are the first 3 steps you would take to revamp a legacy piece of content in order to increase the chances it's pulled by an LLM?
Yeah, no, here's what I would do. First, I would identify the synthetic queries in the query fan out, see how that aligns with the content. And just like Andrea was saying, which of those actually makes sense for you and your brand. And then I would work on, better chunking of the content. So if you've got a bunch of, walls of text, breaking those up into semantic units that make sense, improving the heading tags and so on. Also, in some cases say explicitly, here's the answer to this question. And then beyond that, I would start looking at other properties that I have control over where I can answer those questions as well. So again, do I want to publish on LinkedIn posts? Is there a subreddit that I'm already a part of that I can like add an answer to that's relevant to an actual thread? What are we doing in digital PR as well? But for explicitly what you're saying with this existing piece of content, it's everything that we said, like making sure that we're using the semantic triples, we're chopping up the content and so it's more clear, improving readability and things of that nature.
This is a really interesting one from Pavel I want to jump to is, could personal data, browsing, search history be embedded into the query vectors and used for relevance calculations versus vectorized site chunks to create AM response?
I think so. I think that
both.
That's exactly the way in which it's working. And that's why you want to be highly focused on understanding, who are your target personas, because personal data, it's part of the mix. And now I'm speculating that, they're using LoRa tune adapters for doing that. That's really technical talk. But reality is that, they are embedding, personal data in order to fan out the queries and in order to match it with the best content. And that's why, generally they are saying, and maybe that's true, that they are, covering and sending traffic to more sites, to more content. It's broader the reach, right? Because, of these personalization dynamics. And before, of course, with, kind of traditional ranking system, there was a smaller set of pages that would receive, higher level of traffic. Now it's going to change also in terms of distribution.
And then Alexander, I guess if you want to go into any more depth or anything we haven't covered with structured data, what's the importance of structured data in the new mode of AI mediated searches and of the structuring of information in general? Any other best practices you'd recommend? Do all the things, structured data, everything?
I think that, covering well the attributes that match the fan out, it's a great starting point, right? As I said, if someone is asking about, for example, sustainability of your product and you do not have any information about sustainability in your product description, product markup, then you should add it. Because again, it's helping reinforcing the message, and it's helping you. You have to imagine that also there are different levels at which memory gets created. Like when we publish structured data, this ends up into Common Crawl, and Common Crawl has a specific, data set for all the structured data. So if I'm training a model and I want to train it to reason, for example, about products or sustainability of products and whatnot, I'm going to use that structured data that is inside Common Crawl, and I want to, kind of build my model, and that's maybe going to take, 6 months, a year. So I'm building memory for a system that will appear 6 months from now. But again, if I am Google, well, Google is relying on the entities in the Google shopping graph, and so the best way to influence that is using structured data and the shopping feeds, and that's how you're going to impact today, the response on these specific queries. So you have to think in terms of memory, and you have to think in terms of a timeline. You can create an impact now, for example, on Grok, if you start, posting a bunch of stuff on X, which I've done in the past, and you can, impact memory on Google for a transactional query by, feeding structured data for products. But you can also impact future models by, adding structured data that then gets crawled into Common Crawl and then used for, retraining the model.
Perfect. Last question, because we're almost at time, but obviously we could all talk about this but I thought this was interesting. Richard wants to know, okay, guys, which embedding model do you prefer? Mike, you want to take this first?
Sure. So when I'm doing open source stuff, I'm typically using the mixed bread models. Otherwise, I'm using Gemini because I want to use something as close to what Google is using as possible.
Yeah,
Andrea?
That's the same. I mean, a Matryoshka embedding is it's a type of embedding that I would suggest if you're doing stuff on your own, because it will preserve the regardless of the size, the meaning, And it's very effective, and it's there's a lot of open source solution on that. But of course, if we're doing work for SEO, you want to use the Gemini embeddings. There's no way out. If you want to work on the ChatGPT, you want to use their embedding. You want to understand the way in which they're embedding things. And so, yeah, depending on the platform.
There you go. You guys, if you weren't able to get your questions in, these guys are available. They're on LinkedIn, they're on X. You can hit us up on our emails. We'll send out all that information via email after this presentation is over. We'll get the decks to you, we'll get the videos. Like Mike said, if anyone is looking for any sort of relevance engineering services and like wants to get rocking and rolling and wants us to either put that strategy together or help you really make sure that you're doing everything right, then iPullRank can help you out. And Andrea, any big pitch for WordLift? Obviously, you guys are building the foundation structure for a lot of these brands.
Yeah, I want to work on a lot on automation. So every time that you think about automating things with an agent, then you just call Mike and Mike called me, or you call me and I call Mike, then do the other work. He does the strategy, I do the automation, I do the robots.
There you go.
There you go. Well, thank you all for joining us. My name is Garrett Sussman. It's iPullRank WordLift bringing you this webinar. Keep your eyes peeled because we've got some really big, exciting things coming, especially in iPullRank. If you missed SEO week, let's just say next week we're dropping something pretty amazing to get your summer, make it even hotter than it already is. So we'll see you guys later. Have a good one.